That is super lecture, but it's not mine. Now we go. Thank you. So, first of all, thank you for being here, all of you. We are now back in Montreal and ready for another week of fun science, fun education, and fun networking. And I hope you all will enjoy it. And I will say it in Swedish. Welcome to the ISRM den 27 årliga mötet i Montreal. Welcome to ISMRM, the 27th annual meeting in Montreal. And this is actually the second time we are in Montreal. Last time was 2011. And therefore I will think we should take the opportunity to greet and thank you to the Montreal city and its inhabitants for hosting us again here in this lovely city. That was easy, right? No, I'm just joking. So I will talk a little bit about the state of our society. And I could clearly say that the society is in great shape. We are a diverse, inclusive society where we bring along students, postdocs, fellows, clinicians, physicists, bioengineers, technicians, and together with the SMRT, our MR radiographers, into the same community, into the same group, and we do this with joy and pleasure, and we have fun together. So take this opportunity this week to network with all of your colleagues within the ISMRM community. Secondly, I could also say that a member survey that was done, that is not fully evaluated yet, it said that majority of you feel that ISMRM is a safe place, it's an open place, and where you could feel secure. And that's good. There are some other things that we still need to improve, and we will be working on that, the leadership as well as the different committees. Just a few numbers. As you can see, we are now over 7,600 paying members. We have an increase in the membership overall, and we could see that the increase is partly, of course, North America, but we also see an increase in our members from Europe and from the Asian Pacific. What is a little sad, and especially for me, being an MD, is to see that we have a slow but steady decline in clinicians being members. And that is something that the society needs to work on to find better solutions to bring back the clinicians, because they are extremely valuable to our society and to the network and the collaboration we do with our MR physicists and radiographers. What is nice is to see that there have been a better gender balance between male and females within the society. But what is a little sad is again to see that though we have a lot of female students, we only have 25% of the full members being women. And that is something we need to address. Why the women leave the society, why they leave after they finish as students, trainees, and postdocs. So any good suggestions you have, don't hesitate to let us know. Again, a few numbers just to see how well our society is at the moment. We have, as I said, over 7,600 paying members. Almost half of them are student members. This year, there was 6,016 abstracts. And attending at the meeting as of today, we are around 5,400. I know we didn't beat the Paris record, but who can beat Paris? So we have to live with the fact that we do better than last time in Montreal and better than we did in Toronto. We have 14 workshops this past year, and that is to the help of the central office and the different workshop and study groups that come out with lovely workshops throughout the world. And we also have these virtual study group meetings. We have 12 this year. We have 2 very strong journals, and we have several ongoing innovations going on. While we're talking about the state of the society, and we're blessed that we are here and having fun, we have to keep in memory those that left us the past year. And I have a few persons that I would like to address, and I want you all to give them a little thought while I go through. We will start with Alexander Margulis. He loved to be called Alex, and I have to admit I have met him several times, and he wants to be called Alex. He was a global visionary and leader of radiology in so many ways. He was fundamental for in the heart of the early success of UCSF, where he was chair for over 26 years. He had a very insightful and visionary feeling for the future, and he was incremental in the development of CT, PET, and MRI over at UCSF, and was also one of those early pioneers in and informing our society, the ISMRM. He was considered to be a brilliant negotiator, but what he maybe was most of all was a mentor, an educator, and an inspiration for many, many students from around the world that hold him very, very dear and high. And therefore, he also have received a numerous awards, which I'm not going to read all of them, but I think he was especially proud of the one that he got in radiology, the gold medal in radiology, and now I need my glasses, otherwise I don't see anything. And the other one is also that he was receiving a rank of Chevalier of the French Legion by the honor of the French president for their mentorship, education, and guidance for a lot of French colleagues now back in Europe. So in the memory of Alex. The next person who have left us is James Hodgson. He was known for his incredible broad knowledge in science and engineering. Together with Bill Edelstein, they built the first full-body scanner with the team at University of Aberdeen. And he also was the developer of SpinWrap, which fundamentally changed the face of MR research and the use of MR today. Sadly, just a month ago or so, Sarah Nelson passed away. She was famous for her contributions in medical imaging, particularly in magnetic resonance spectroscopy, hyperpolarized 13-carbon imaging, in neuro-oncology, with 20 years of continuous NIH funding in these topics. She has also received numerous of awards, and as a pioneer in imaging science and an extraordinary leader, mentor and innovator and scholar who shared her visions, her wisdom, and knowledge generously to everybody, unconditionally. And I know that Sarah was extremely happy over the awards that she had been given, and especially maybe the gold medal of the World Molecular Imaging Society that she received a few years ago. Finally, we have John Ulmer, who tragically passed away a few days ago. He was the section chief of neuroradiology at the Medical College of Wisconsin and was a past president of the American Society of Functional Neuroradiology. He played an incremental role in implementing the clinical use of functional MRI and DTI as a part of the preoperative workup of patients with brain tumors. He was an author of several papers, well-known educator, and respected for his contributions within the field of MRI. We have some new leaders. First, we need to welcome our Vice President-elect, Fernando Calmante, a PhD professor from the University of Sydney. We have 4 new Board of Trustee members. It's Pek Langkong from University of Hong Kong. It's Professor Christopher Hess from University of UCSF. We have Professor Andrew Webb from the Leiden University Medical Center, and we have Professor Krishna Nachak from the University of Southern California. We welcome to be our new leaders within the society for the coming years, and wish them all the luck. Coming to this meeting, we have our annual meeting program chair, John Port, a dear friend, so it was a very easy choice for me to select him because I know his capabilities. He's a great planner, he's an extremely hard worker, he's very diligent, he's very honest, and he's very helpful, and he's a formidable force for change and adjustments. So he has done a lot to advocate for engaging you, our members, and also try to bring back our clinicians. And I've done that by creating the SAM sessions. He started last year and increased them this year. As you all know, we are thinking about the climate, so we have gone to digital posters only, and that was John's idea. So you have 200 screens where you could play with and take a look at all the nice digital posters that we have presented. He had the member-initiated sessions that was created also last year, and then he came up with a new idea, which I think you should all take the advantage of, what we call the campfire talks with a legend. So we have the possibility to meet pioneers from our field, chat with them, listen to what they have to say, and ask them questions. And of course, John is a very smart person. He kept great sessions, like the secret sessions, and much, much more in this program that is totally fantastic. So what have I done the past year since I got this presidency? Well, we have worked on our strategic plan. We have a new MRM editor. We have the installation of a quality officer, and we have established an ad hoc committee of sustainability. I was able to say it. So we start with our new strategic plan. This is something that was implemented by the past president, Dan Söderqvist, and that was something that he was really took to his heart as something important. The disruptors in this world that makes the MR value so more important to promote, to mention, and to demonstrate. So please, every time you have a chance to show your surrounding, your colleagues, the value of MR, do it. And do it to your patients. That will increase our vision, it will increase our visibility in the world, and it's a part of the strategic plan for ISMRM. If you want to read more about the strategic plan, you could find that at our website. After 9 years, Professor Matt Bernstein decided to step down after being a very successful editor of MRM. So early this year, Professor Peter Jessard had been appointed as the new editor, and he will start his work as of the 1st of January 2020, even though I know that both he and Matt are already in some kind of transition to take over this very important work. As I previously said, ISMRM embraces the value, the diversity of its community. And it's our mission to make sure that everyone working in our field has the equal and fair opportunities to contribute. And after the many discussions we had at the Paris meeting and the discussions about diversity, one of my first tasks as becoming president was actually to appoint a new equality officer, and that is Professor Elizabeth Morris, or often called Liz. And Liz has a very important task. She's there helping us to remember that we don't forget to be diverse, to be inclusive in everything we do. And I could say that I'm very happy that Liz took this assignment. She does a beautiful job, and she really makes us on track. Climate changes, and that is on the agenda. So I had the pleasure, together with the incoming president, Larry Wald, to appoint an ad hoc committee for sustainability. And it's my great pleasure that Professor Christopher Hess accepted to chair this committee. And this committee will look into what we have done, what we can do, and looking for new solutions for the ISMRM to keep on being as good as possible when we deal with the climate. And he will have a committee that will work on this, but I also like to point out that ISRM has been aware of this for a long time. And the central office has paid a lot of attention to matters and have actually been working on these issues for the past years to find solutions where we can decrease the number of effect we have on the climate. So you have now digital posters, all our venues are LEED certified, all our, we don't have any program books anymore, you have the app, you have your USB sticks, and so on. But much more can be done, and I will looking forward to see what Chris, together with his committee, will come up with in the near future. When I mentioned this at our board meeting yesterday, I said, well, you know, me coming from Europe and coming from Sweden, I said, well, you know, Greta Thunberg. I got question marks from most of the members. And that's of course, because maybe many of you are not aware of Greta Thunberg, but if you come from Europe and if you come from Scandinavia, you certainly know what this 16-year-old girl have done in just a couple of months by starting school strikes for the climate every Friday. And it's now a movement that goes around in Europe. And she's presenting in different countries and up on the podium quite frequently. So take a look at her and you will be surprised. I will continue with some highlights of this meeting. Far from all, I could only take a couple of ones. I don't want to be speaking here too long. But some of the highlights that I think is really worth to attend is the Equity, Diversity and Inclusive, the EDI Forum, that will be led on Wednesday the 15th at between 7 and 9 in room 710A. And please note that there is a reservation needed, so go to the registration desk and reserve a seat for this very important event, where 3 major topics will be discussed: the accessibility to society activities, research dissemination, and participation in MR research. There are 3 lectures given by 3 different speakers, and the leadership are going to be there as a part of the panel to take questions and try to hopefully be able to give some answers. As I mentioned before, John Port, our program chair, came up with a new idea: campfires with a legend. So take the chance and go and listening and talk to the pioneers and the legends of our field. They have a lot to tell, both important scientific stories, but I'm sure they could tell you many personal, fun stories as well that will make this very interesting. It starts tomorrow. It's going to be 3 sessions per day, and you will find them sitting, chatting together. Take any opportunity to come and go and listen to them. We have the memory-initiated symposium, and there are several, and they are very good. And again, we have to think about our young members who are so eager, so enthusiastic to create sessions. And even this year, we are running the secret sessions, so nobody knows what they're going to do there, but you go to the Resonarium, it's down in the exhibition hall, and I'll promise you, you would have these interesting, exciting discussions on different topics that is important to all of us, and that engage all of us. Again, to support our students, I think it's important that you visit the Young Investigator Award session Monday morning, and also the Junior Fellow Plan session on Wednesday at 1:30 in the room 78B, with MR Global Perspective, the unrepresented part of the MR spectrum. It's a very interesting session, and I really welcome you all to go and listen to this. And of course, our young students, postdocs and fellows, they do a lot of scientific work. So take the chance and go and look at what they do. Go and listen to the scientific sessions. Go to the digital posters and check what beautiful and interesting work they present. We need to engage our students and with our students, and they are the future for the ISMRM. Excuse me. We have a lot of sponsors and support, and without them, meetings like this might be extremely difficult to hold and to manage. So there are 4 lunch symposium, corporate symposium this year, Monday to Thursday, if the big vendors will present one each day. So check your mobile app, when they are, and what they talk about. And I would really ask you that when you visit the exhibit hall, take the time to go by and say thank you for the support they give to ISMRM. Extremely valuable for our society. We live in a tumult world, and we see that more healthcare providers, young students in the academic setting, but also in other settings, are suffering from stress and illness, or illness that is due to stress. And therefore, I have chosen for the presidential lecture this year, Professor Håkan Arheden, who is a professor in radiology, clinical physiology, to be honest. He is the leader of the MR Cardiac group in Lund. But more importantly, he has also a professional leadership and coaching in leadership, where he's helping both businesses as well as healthcare institutions to deal with different issues. And I will come back to that when I present him at the presidential lecture. But come and listen to what he thinks when stress rules, what we do and what happens to us. It will be on Wednesday at 10:30 to 11 in the Plenary hall, and I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to present Håkan even further at that time. We have some young students that have been very active this spring. So take a look at the magazine, Magnetic Resonance in Medicine Highlights. Around the conference center throughout the week, they will be placed out. It's a group of Erika, Atef, and Nicola that have put together very interesting interviews and comments from the leadership and from others, and presents that in Magnetic Resonance in Medicine Highlights. So, how can you contribute? Well, of course, all of you are welcome to donate money. That will, of course, assist for us to give stipends to over more than 1,500 trainees annually to come to the annual meeting or workshops. So you could do the donation through the website or through the registration office and so on. But what I would like to say that I think we already donate. You all here are donating with your brain and your mind. You contribute with your time, both here at the lab, in the clinic. You contribute by the collaboration you do between your fellow colleagues, between the physicists or MDs, with your MR radiographers. You contribute by sharing science and innovation, not just at your own little place, but between different labs and different countries. You contribute by being a mentee. So as a young person, you contribute, but actually giving your time and your efforts to do something and learn something. And you contribute by being a mentor for your students, your postdocs, and your junior colleagues, and maybe later on in life, even senior colleagues. You also contribute by being a research friend, but being there for your research colleagues to support and help when things go not as good as you think, when the paper didn't get accepted, or when everything goes great, to hail them and salute them for good work. And you are there by being a teacher in the clinical world for our medical students and for our clinical colleagues. But we can also contribute, and we do contribute, by music.
La bum la ba ba bum la ba bum ba bum bum. La bum bum ba la bum bum ba. La bum bum ba la bum bum ba. La ba 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 ba.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This is the giant quartet Finn from Lund in Sweden, and we are very happy to be here to give Pia a hand in opening this interesting congress with some music. This was a fanfare, and we will continue with a song about something you guys know an awful lot about, MRI. We will describe MRI from the proton's point of view. You may recognize the music, and if you listen carefully, you might even hear the sounds of an MR scanner somewhere there. But the text is new. The text is written by Dr. Claes Lundström, who is the research manager at the Swedish company Sectra. So listen carefully. This is magnetic resonance scanning as described by the proton. Today magnetic resonance will happen. Today the moment's here to be revealed. The Tesla gives that rhythm of precession. I'm going for those pleasures in the field. I want the spray of radio frequency around me to start those magnets, steer the gradients to my spot, and start that pulse real slow to let me go. I'm so excited, our spin's united. I'm about to get relaxed and I think I like it. I'm so excited, my pulse ignited. So take me T1, T2, PD, let's go to K-Space, my place.
I'll show you aneurysms and stenosis. Gadolinium will last a long, long time. I'll find all plaques of multiple sclerosis and any lesion that you have in mind. I want the sound of echo, feel the flare around me, make that sequence frequent. I just can't get enough. Let's start that pulse real slow to let me go. I'm so excited, our spin's united. I'm about to get relaxed and I think I like it. I'm so excited, my pulse ignited. So take me T1, T2, PD, let's go to K-Space, my place.
Ja, det blev...
Thank you. So it's now my honor, and before I do that, I would just like to say, after the Lauterbur lecture, there will be a little bit more music, 2 more words from me, and then we go to the exhibition hall. Okay, so it's a great pleasure to introduce this year's Lauterbur lecturer, Professor Peter van der Zijl. He's the professor at the Department of Radiology and Oncology and Biophysics at Johns Hopkins University Medical School. He's the founding director of the F.M. Kirby Research Center for Functional Brain Imaging at the Kennedy Krieger Institute. He is a former ISMRM Fellow and ISMRM Gold Medalist for his contributions, significant contributions in DTI, fMRI, and MRS. And he got the Laukin Prize for CEST MRI together with Balaban at the ENC 2016. So who is then this Peter van der Zijl? Well, he comes from Amsterdam. He loved to play soccer and obviously have done a lot of that in his life. But what you maybe don't know is he's a competitive bridge player and actually have won several bridge games. I don't know how much money he made, but he obviously won. and he loves to play bridge, and I know that he goes and play bridge even when he's visiting Sweden and his fiancée Linda Knudsen. And for those who don't know it, they're actually getting married in 2 months. So that's soon a wife-to-be. And Linda and Peter together travel very much around the world, and quite frequently they visit China and other places where they have a lot of research friends and colleagues. So please, let us give a warm applause for this year's Lauterbur lecturer, Professor Peter van der Zijl.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Pia. And of course, I want to start by thanking the organizers very much for this great honor, and especially the program committee. And for asking me to talk about history. And when they ask you to talk about history, basically your history. So, and that gets confirmed because you get a blue ribbon which says more than 30-year member. So basically, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience in the field. And during those 30 years, I've seen enormous changes in the field. And, you know, my colleagues and I have been lucky to make some small contributions, and I'll talk a bit about that today. And I've chosen the title here because I think life just happens. And for me, what happened a lot is serendipity. And for those who don't speak English or are not too familiar with this, what is serendipity? That is the occurrence of events by chance in a happy or beneficial way. And it comes from a fairy tale. It was first coined by Horace Walpole, but it's a fairy tale from Sri Lanka where 3 princes travel around and they have all these serendipitous events. So during my talks now and then I'll show a serendipity stamp when I lucked out again and things went well for me. So I have a little conflict because I work together with Philips. And another disclaimer, so everything I'm going to talk about is from personal memory, so other people might remember other things. So, but I'm the one who is talking, so it doesn't make any difference. And I got a lot of pictures from many people, so I could talk for hours just showing pictures. But I chose a few, so please don't be angry with me if I don't show all your pictures. Okay. Well, I'll start in Amsterdam, you know. So I'm very old, so that's why the pictures are in black and white. And the first 17 years I just spent in a little bit in Amsterdam and then in a small town called Alkmaar. And then graduated high school in 1974, so not much of an event. You can see we had long hair in those days, and I always wanted to be in front, but the teacher was even more in front. But what was happening in 74, what was more important is that Paul Lauterbur, he really made great strides and was publishing about magnetic resonance imaging, which he called sugmatography. Because nobody could pronounce it, they made it MRI. And I have these pictures from Joe Frank, and I would like to honor, you know, the father of our field, after whom the lecture is named. Now, what am I going to talk about? A little bit about those 30 years. When I was a student and a PhD student, I studied some susceptibility tensors, relaxation theory, exchange, which is actually basically what I'm doing now again, but in between, we did some spectroscopy, diffusion, fMRI, and some CEST work. And I'm going to talk about mainly the period, the late 80s and the 90s, because the recent 20 years is not so interesting, I think. Well, many things happen, but I don't remember recent events. Okay. So, well, I did my PhD study in Amsterdam in physical chemistry. I worked with Professor McLean, and we were orienting molecules in magnetic fields because those molecules had the anisotropy and the magnetic susceptibility, and that led to quadrupolar and dipolar splitting. So we went to high field sites. 11.7 Tesla was the highest field in Holland. We also like traveling. Here I'm with Peter Luiten, playing soccer in Portoroch. And perhaps you can see this person in the back here, that's Kurt Rudwig. mean soccer player, but he also got the Nobel Prize for chemistry a few years later. So, and then I went to the US for the first time, and why was that? Because they had the highest magnetic field in the world in nuclear magnetic resonance, and that was Professor Botnerby. And two interesting things happened, so I've basically hardly ever been out of Holland. So I went to Pittsburgh, and I never go to restaurants because I didn't have money. So I thought I found this great restaurant, the Pancake Kitchen. So I was there for 6 weeks. So every day I went for breakfast, lunch, and dinner to the Pancake Kitchen. And I had eggs for breakfast and 21 shrimp in a basket for lunch and dinner. And then at night we went drinking beer if we didn't do experiments. So after 6 weeks I was 15 pounds heavier. And I basically never lost that. So then one other thing happened. I flew with Pan Am, that was still available in those days. So one flight we were going from London to New York, and after 2 hours flying, the pilot said, well, perhaps some of you have noticed that one of the engines is on fire. So everybody looked outside and the engine was on fire, but he said nothing to worry about. So we're going to turn the engine off and we're going to fly back. So they dumped 100,000 liters of kerosene in the ocean, and we flew back to London and landed. And then we had to wait 12 hours, and we got one lunch ticket from Pan Am. So no wonder they are not around anymore. Yeah. Okay, so then I graduated. I had to come up with a title. So I said high field, high resolution NMR of liquids and gases, which can basically be anything. So, and here are my great mentors, Professor Botnerby and McLean. And they were really great because they just let me fool around. I could do whatever I wanted. And I basically let most of my people who work for me do the same. And they come up with great ideas. Then I moved to the US. Why was that? That was actually serendipitous because I think I was one of the first of my year to graduate. And I got all these job interviews at companies. But somehow I didn't get a job, probably because I didn't know how to interview. And the last interview was at Unilever. I was there for the 3rd time. And I went there, and the psychologist talked to me, went very well. And she said, I have to admit, the night before I went to the bar till 4 in the morning. So I probably didn't look too good. So then the psychologist said, well, Dr. Van Zyl, how was your interview? I said, it was great, nice people, will be good to work with. And then I said, but what else can you say at an interview? So I didn't get that job either. So then I thought what to do. I'll just move to the US. So I sold the house I lived in most of my life and went to the US, and I never looked back, except on this picture here. Okay, and then I went to the US to Professor Botnerby, where I did a few more years of aligning molecules, and I soon became familiar with the American system, because about 8 months after I was there, or 6 months, Professor Botnerby comes to me and says, Peter, my grant has run out and I cannot pay you anymore. So I said, well, but I sold my house and I have no money, so can I stay perhaps longer? So he got some money from the school and I could stay longer. Then another year later, I had like 16 papers, so I thought I should be young faculty. So I sent letters. In those days, there was no email, so I sent typed letters, 50 letters to universities. And I got only 2 responses, and they were basically saying, you will never get a job in academics because your research won't get grant funding. So then I thought, okay, I'll apply to a company. So I applied to Bruker. And at Bruker, they said, well, you have too many papers, you should be in academics. So I was getting pretty desperate, but fortunately, at that time, my old friend Peter Lauterbur from graduate school, who was working at Philips, he said, why don't you switch to in vivo NMR? They need some good physicists. And then I applied, and there were a ton of jobs available. Mike Weiner offered me a job, Truman Brown. And then there was a very interesting and lucky event. So I was at work on the scanner, which is what I mostly do. And there was a visitor called Vladis Kleinhaar. And Dr. Dadok introduced me to him. He said, this is Peter, he's looking for a job. And he told me Jack Cohen at NIH was looking for a job. And I applied to Jack, and I visited. And when I came in, Jack said, well, you're going to get the job, but I just had to invite you over. And later he told me, because he called my old advisor in Amsterdam, and he said, just hire him, it will be okay. So that was a lucky event. And that was really where my in vivo life started. And NIH, I was totally lucky. It was a stimulating environment. I was working for Jack, you know, so I learned a lot about cancer. And I met Crit Moonen, who was the manager. And there was a large amount of young, active people like Bob Turner, Danila Bihan, all leaders in the field now who were doing different things. David Holt building coils, Joe Frank, Bob Balaban, Jeff Alger and Alberto Bizzi doing spectroscopy, Jim Picard doing multiple quantum sodium. So I basically totally lucked out. And there was the latest equipment. It looks a bit dated now, but in those days, 2 animal scanners and a human scanner, it was just amazing. And I had all the time I wanted to play around on the scanner. So Crit and I, we were kind of a team. Jack said, go do some useful things. And so I went to the center, and Crit and I started working together on spectroscopy. So we did some water suppression with gradients, spectral editing, signal selection or coherence selection. And after a year or so, we were able to get very beautiful in vivo proton spectra. And we were not very modest. We said the spectral resolution is clearly superior to any previously reported in vivo data on animals. Okay, so about 1 week later, I got a letter from Bob Schulman. And the letter said, Dear Dr. Van Zyl, I read with great interest your paper. However, he said, you have beautiful spectra, but you have not referred to any of our work. So I went to Crit, I just came from NMR. I said, who is this guy? And he said, that's Bob Schulman, the most important MR spectroscopist in the field. So I said, okay. So I wrote him a nice letter, and I apologized. And since then, we've been great friends, and with the other people at Yale, like Doug Rotman, and we do many things together. Okay, so it was nice at NIH. We got visitors like Jens Frahm, who talked about steam spectroscopy, and he was the first to implement it on the scanner. And we thought, well, we should do human scanning too. Here's Jens visiting. I think we're drinking beer. And I have 2 cups, but one was for Jens extra, I think. And we thought we have to also do work on the human scanner, but that's not so easy. The GE scanner was very hard to program. So, but we lucked out again because Jack Cohen had a postdoc who just went to Pittsburgh, so Peter Daly, and he met Joe Killen there at the Pittsburgh NMR Institute, and Joe knew everything about scanners. So Crit and I went there, and in 1 weekend we probably worked 14 hours a day, and after the weekend we could make nice in vivo spectra on the clinical scanner. So that was lucky again. Now, I have to say something. So we are still NMR people. So I'm going to talk 3 slides about high-resolution NMR. So while we were doing this work, I was getting used to gradients, and I never heard of it because I was in high-resolution NMR. And but you could do anything with gradients. You could clean your spectra up and stuff like that. We thought they have to do that in high-resolution NMR. And in high-resolution NMR, they were doing these complicated pulse sequences here. 15N RF pulses, 13 CRF pulses, proton RF pulses, transfer pathways, and they all did it with phase cycling of the RF pulses. So it seemed to us you needed gradients to address that. Well, then we read the literature, and some people had already suggested it, like Ad Bax and Peter Barker, but nobody had done it because they couldn't have those gradients in those days. And at the ISMRM in '89, we met Ralph Hurd, and he was already working on that too. And he worked at GE Fremont. They still were making high-res equipment and animal scanners. And they had already built the first high-res shielded gradients. And what was the problem with this phase cycling? You got this noise in the spectra. They call it T1 noise. And Ralph had done an interesting experiment. So you might remember the 1989 earthquake in San Francisco. All the roads were flattened, everything shaking. Well, Ralph had done a multiple quantum gradient experiment during the earthquake by accident, and no T1 noise. So basically, that was the best thing to show that things would work. So we worked together, And, I can talk a whole hour about all the different things we did, but no time. So, but basically, before 1990, all scanners used phase cycling in high-resolution NMR. And after 1999, basically every scanner had a gradient. So we did something useful back to high-resolution NMR. But something interesting also happened because Ralph, he didn't change in 9 years. And recently I met him and he still looks the same. So anyway, to make a long story short, so our gradient work, they put it in 40 years of JMR, 20 papers that were important in the field. And if you're at night at home and you can't sleep, you can watch this YouTube video where we explain what happened, and then you'll be sleeping in no time. Okay, then back to NIH, and QUIT was hiring a lot of Dutch people, so we were doing spectroscopy. And so we hired Jeff Duin and Peter van Gelderen, this is me, I guess, and QUIT. So they were starting to call us the Dutch Mafia, so we thought, okay, what shall we do? We need a tattoo or something, but we're pretty mousy, so that didn't look like a good idea. So on our abstracts in '93, we put little windmills. And in those days, the abstracts, we had to glue them, so you were running around with boxes with glue, and we put windmills on, so they couldn't remove them, so all the Dutch abstracts had these windmills. So, okay, but then more serious work. So we were lucky that QUIT had a good connection with GE Fremont, and Piet Reumer had made some shielded gradients, and we were able, because of the shielded gradients, to do very nice diffusion experiments. Before that, we had like 2-second eddy currents, so you could hardly do anything. So we started working with diffusion, doing water suppression, diffusion filters for intra-extracellular. And one thing we worked on was, for instance, this is with Jack Cohen, who liked to do perfused cancer cells. So we were doing separating intracellular and extracellular water by doing diffusion weighting and diffusion filters. And with the cells, you could see the intracellular water, and gel and medium, you couldn't see it. And we could separate out the intracellular spectrum. And here it was nice that Bob Schulman was my friend now, because he came by my poster and he said, oh, you have to put that in PNAS, so he edited it for PNAS. Okay, then in the early 90s, diffusion was getting important, and I think the two very important contributions were by Mike Mosley. So he showed that early in ischemia, you saw hyperintensity in diffusion-weighted imaging, and he showed anisotropy in the brain. So basically, Mike was hot in many ways, we remember. Okay, so QUIT thought, well, let's start doing that too. So here's some early work in '91. So he showed actually that during ischemia, the anisotropy didn't change, but it kind of interfered, because how do you know this is just ischemia? This is absolute diffusion, so it goes down. It could be here ischemic 2 and here ischemic 2. So he and Peter van Gelderen came up by using the diffusion trace, which is an invariant combination of tensor components. So when you do the X, Y, and Z component and you add them up, you get a trace, and then you could see very clearly the outline of the ischemia. And that really, I think, set the stage for the stroke imaging. At the same time, we wrote a book chapter, so with some tensor theory, but people didn't read many book chapters. So at the same time, Peter Basser really did the first work with Libby Hahn on the tensor imaging and spectroscopy, and later they defined the anisotropies that were normalized, which everybody is using now. So in the meantime, life goes on, and I had to find another job because I was at Georgetown. I went with Jack to Georgetown. I still remember I come at Georgetown, and by that time I had like 32 papers. I went with Jack to the pharmacology department, and they said, well, why are you bringing this guy so we can make him a research associate? So I had to fight to become an assistant professor. But we had fun working with Jack, but Jack said he would move on at some point. And I was very lucky again, because Jerry Clixon offered me a great opportunity. He invited me to come to Hopkins. And that really, set the stage for many things I did, because that was the place to be. And you see other people here, Peter Barker, Zavor Bourgeois, and early members of my group like Suzumu Mori. Okay, but then I had already written a grant. I came in with a grant, but of course I was doing all experiments at NIH, so I didn't know you needed money. So then I had to apply for another grant to pay for all the work we did. And I started working with Dick Traceman, who is a world expert on stroke. So I thought, well, I need to do something new. Until now, I haven't done anything new. So I thought, let's do diffusion, show it can be done fast. So we showed that within 1 minute after stroke, after ischemia, the diffusion went down and it was reversible. And also, we did some more experiments. I was, by those days, very good at making spectra here, 4.8 millisecond echo time. And we were showing that with ischemia, we could see an increase in this peak here at high ppm and in the lactate. So we measured the diffusion changes and the lactate. And we thought these were the purine nucleotides. But we were actually totally wrong. So we wrote this whole paper. The data are beautiful, but the interpretation totally wrong. So because these are actually the exchangeable protons, and when you get ischemia, the pH goes down and the signal goes up. But everything is right there. You just have to reread it and read pH instead of purine nucleotides. Okay, and then we did some work in humans where we could show that with diffusion trace imaging, we could separate old and new strokes, and here. And there was a controversy in those days because people had studied diffusion in the clinic and people were arguing about the evolution of the diffusion constant and they couldn't get it right. And the reason was, of course, because they looked only in one direction, X, Y, or Z. And we showed here the black lines that with the trace or with the ipsilateral contralateral ratio, you could get very constant time evolutions. So that is what people used since then. Okay, now a little bit about students and postdocs. I always think, you know, once you become faculty, you need good students, and I was very lucky. I got Suzumu Mori. I was teaching a class on quantum mechanics and NMR, and after my class, Suzumu came to me and he said, well, I would like to work for you. He could hardly speak English, but he could say work, and he said he wanted to work on exchange. So I said, okay, what is your background? He said he had a master's in fisheries. So that sounded great to me, so I took him right away. And, well, that was basically the best decision. So we worked on many topics. And one topic we did, so he started working on trace imaging. And I thought Crit had a good idea, but in the clinic, then they would have to do 3 directions. So why don't we do it in 1 direction? So you could do that, of course, but then you get combinations of tensor elements. You can write them out. But then we thought, well, if you do in a certain order, the off-diagonal elements drop out, and we get only the trace. So, and Suzumu had to make a phantom. So, and here it came out already. He was Japanese, was good, because he said, let's make a chicken gizzard phantom. I'd never heard of chicken gizzards, but he said, we eat those. And so he made a phantom with 4 chicken gizzards, and you see clear anisotropy, and when we did the trace, it disappeared. And basically, that's trace imaging or isotropic imaging, and it's getting popular again. Now they call it spherical weighting, but it's all the same stuff. And then we did it in vivo, so we could do the trace imaging, show it showed the right spot. And then we even did it on the human scanner, but not much gradient strength. Here you see X, Y, Z, and the trace just with 3 directions. But then you still got these background field artifacts. But you could do many different things. So we calculated the best direction so that even the background gradients would remove, and we could get these beautiful images. So we should probably try it again, because now there is 7 to 8 cows per centimeter. And in humans, we also got beautiful images. Okay, now at the same time, so it was a busy time. So Suzumu and I working, and 1 or 2 postdocs were working on exchange spectroscopy, stroke imaging, fMRI mechanisms. I'll talk about that in a second. Gradient NMR, I wrote 4 grants in '95. And we were doing DTI, and we had this beautiful data, and other people too, like Basser's lab, and so they had all this data in humans. You could see there were fibers, but nobody could track them. And Suzumu was doing exchange spectroscopy, and he became a postdoc, and then he became an assistant professor. And he said, well, I want to do something different. So I said, well, neither of us has been able to solve this fiber tracking thing. Perhaps you can look at it. And amazingly, a few months later, he had implemented it in animals, and he could do the fiber tracking, came up with an algorithm. And, you know, I was totally ecstatic. So he presented it in '98. Then we tried to send it to Nature, got rejected. Science got rejected. PNAS got rejected. We're getting worried. You know, that took a whole year, that process. But then finally, we got it accepted in '99. So we were still first. Okay, and then things went quickly. So in '99, we started working with Philips together. And we got to human scanning. And actually, a friend of the family came by. And she said she had a brain tumor, so I put her in the scanner. These days that would not be possible, but in those days you could do that. So, and we could see she had a meningioma, which was pressing on the cortical spinal tract. And she got later operated, and they knew they had to be careful at that site. So that was an exciting time, and with especially Peter Luiten. He was working at Philips then, traveling around America, and Lauterbur and Jacques Kouwmans and Paul Volkers, and Frank and Ariane. And the rest is kind of history. So Suzumu went on to do these brain atlases. And again, that was nice. So radiology had the 100-year highlights, 15 papers in neuroradiology, and our paper was selected as the beginning of the connectome, so the first brain atlases. So that was nice. Okay, now back to '95. Let's switch topics a little bit. So, as you saw, we were busy doing many things, and I went to the brain meeting to show our stroke results, and there I met Risto Kaupinen. And he came over to me, he said, you make nice spectra, and I want to look at the lactate increase during brain activity. I said, well, you know, I'm doing so many things, I'm not going to do that. You know, this stuff, functional MRI, that's what Camille is doing, Bruce Rosen, you know, they know much better. But then he gave me a lot of beer. And I said, okay, I'll do it. So we did some spectra in the cat, you know, and imaging. And we have very high signal to noise. We calculated we could detect 0.17 millimolar lactate change. But we couldn't see anything. Then we thought, oh, we do hypoxia and stimulation. But we still didn't see any lactate. So basically we published that. It was not a popular paper. But, so everybody forgot about that probably. But what we did notice is that during hypoxia, you got a very strong Bolt effect. And hypoxia is interesting because you get vasodilatation. So, and that basically caused the Bolt effect. So you get this increase in blood flow. So then I got really interested in it. So Risto and Joni Oja, his student, and I, we spent probably a year. I read all the classic hypoxia books, all on brain physiology, and wrote equations, some tissue compartments, vessel compartments, and we could calculate those hypoxia effects exactly and make blood volume maps based on that theory. So we got our paper accepted and also did some T2 to measure venous oxygen extraction fraction. So that was nice. But what was the nicest, actually, Risto held these workshops in Finland, and we always played soccer. Here you see the faculty soccer team, and we played the students who were like 20 years younger, and we always beat them like 6-0, 9-1, so it was very satisfactory. Okay. So now what was the side effect of this? So I really didn't know too much about fMRI, but at the same time, everybody, because of the work in Minneapolis and Boston and also Stanford, everybody wanted to do fMRI. And they were complaining to radiology. They said, we want fMRI, it doesn't work. And in the clinic, there was no time on the scanner. So I got called to a meeting, and there were all these chairs and presidents from neurology, the president of Kennedy Krieger Institute, and the president of KKI said, we will fund a dedicated scanner, but we need a radiology person to set it up. And Dr. Zerhouni, he was smart, he said, well, Van Zyl will set it up. And I thought, uh-oh, because I really didn't know so much. So, and he was smart. He thought if it goes wrong, I can blame Peter, and if it goes right, we have a problem solved. So, okay, but then again, I was lucky because 2 years earlier, I had hired Joe Gillen, remember, who did all the programming on the GE. And Joe Gillen had worked with Keith Tolburn and done functional MRI for many years. So he knew how to set up a center. Then I went to Camille and Bruce Rosen and Joe Helper, and they gave very good advice. So we learned all the things you need to do to get good fMRI data. And Joe knew, he had worked with application people. He said the main thing is it should always work, because otherwise they will complain and you're dead meat. So we worked on the fMRI quality, stability, signal to noise. And everybody said you have to go to a high field. But Joe said, we went to test some 3Ts, and people said, well, it doesn't work half the time. And we had like 50 to 100 people who wanted to do this. So we decided 1.5 T. So that's what we bought. And we hired Jim Picard to help the fMRI people. Xavier Collet was the Philips postdoc. And very talented tech, Terry Brawner, who really helped all the users. So what we had to do to make it work, well, first we thought these flimsy scan rooms with these copper panels, it doesn't work, they crack. So we did a room without a window, a big screen TV, which we put to good use. So here we're watching soccer with Lauterbur from Philips. And at the same time, so the shielding was good, and we also optimized the room for stability, so every loose part of metal was removed, the cables were tightened. And amazingly, we got such good data that within each voxel at 1.5 Tesla, we could see the effects, no problem. And basically everything worked. So we could do a few tenths of a % event-related fMRI and ASL, these data from Xavier. I think people have a hard time getting such data sometimes at 3 Tesla. And spectroscopy and fiber tracking, everything worked. So I thought, well, there's all these resources at the high field. So I'm going to apply for a grant for the National Research for fMRI at low field. So I put in a grant. So, and we got a review panel, and they were all impressed, they said, but they said for a national facility, you need a high field scanner. Okay, so bad luck. So I thought what to do, but I'm Dutch, so I thought, what do you need is money. So I said, I talked to NIH, I said, well, in response to this point, we added a 3 Tesla scanner to the budget. So, and then it got funded. So how lucky can you be? So, and then even more lucky, because 2 years later, Philips had just made the first shortboard 3T scanner. So we lucked out again because it wasn't available when we started the center. And there were many technical developments. So the signal to noise went up, like other people had shown. But Philips also had the parallel imaging fully implemented. So we had phased array coils. We could go to short TE with sense imaging. And we could get strong gradients, already 6 to 7 cows per centimeter, early 2000s. So we could do 32-direction diffusion imaging in 3.5 minutes. So we totally lucked out. So here's some data from those days. I'm not even sure it's published. So 1.7 millimeter midbrain imaging. Now, so as I said, NIH was a dynamic environment. But actually, we were starting our own dynamic environment because we were lucky with all those people. Look, we had Xavier, who is now full professor. Han-Zhang Lu was a student, also a professor. Qin-Yan Zhao, professor. We had Suzumu, we had Terry and Joe. We had Jim Picard and Vince Calhoun, who were working on fMRI, and Barker on spectroscopy. And this is Hangye Yiyang. You might know him. He worked with Suzumu, so he wrote the DTI Studio and later MRI Studio. So we had a very nice group, and that is needed because then you can get things done. So and the center grew very quickly. He had 2002, 2005, so probably 40 people. So the growth went fast, and we got many visitors from all over the world, India, China, and things were going well. And this is what it is now, I just want to show. So, and this is all grant funded. So the institute pays the facilities, but everything we got, a few animal scanners, all grant funded, and the 7T. Okay, now I want to tell some more stories from early 2000. So we had the center, and I was in Glasgow at the ISMRM, probably 1:30, 2 in the morning, having a drink. So I'm sitting in the bar, and I hear some Dutch say, hey, that's Peter van Zyl. I say, who is this? So some young guy came to me, he said, you're Peter van Zyl. I say, well, I'm not sure. But he said, yes, you're Peter van Zyl. So, and he said, I want to come work with you. I said, okay, what do you want to do? He said, well, I want to do perfusion imaging. So I said, okay, you can come work for a while. So he came over, I put him together with Xavier Golay, and he was a very smart radiologist, MD, PhD student. And together they did the first flow territory mapping, so they implemented that on the scanner. So I guess I lucked out again if I wouldn't have been in the bar that night, I would never have met Jeroen. Okay, then another lucky thing happened. So Han-Zhang Lu was my new student from biomedical engineering, and I was getting more and more interested in BOLT. So we had done for the Nature paper, we had all the intravascular things accounted for. So Han-Zhang thought, let's start working on looking at extravascular signals and on a way to remove it. So he thought, let's remove the intravascular signal to look at the extravascular signal. So he designed a T1-based blood experiment. And it worked, but somehow the effects became negative. So he came to me, he said, the effects became negative. I say, that has to be the blood volume. So that's how we discovered the VASO method. And we probably took half a year to a year to come up with an acronym. But so that's how we came up with the VASO, thanks to Han-Zhang here. Okay, I have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to talk a little bit about CEST imaging, which is a thing we do a lot today. I'm not sure everybody is familiar with CEST imaging, but there's not much time to explain. But what you need to know is that in CEST imaging, it's like spectroscopy. Say normally in spectroscopy, you have the water, 111 molar. If you want to look at molecules, they're in the millimolar range, very small peaks. And what you do in CEST actually is you can irradiate the exchangeable protons of these low concentration molecules. And because they exchange with the water, if you have enough exchange and you do it for a sufficient length of time, a second or 2 seconds, you get a large enhancement. And that's using chemical exchange or magnetization transfer. And actually, so that was invented by Bob Balaban. And the first magnetization transfer data were actually done in the 60s by Sture Forsen. And we went to visit him in Lund, where my smart and beautiful fiancée lives. And we went for lunch with Sture here with Mike McMahon. And he told us all about the old days. And when we wrote a CEST book, we said he should write a history chapter. So if you want to read about the history of magnetization transfer in the 60s, it's really a wonderful story. So buy our book. Okay. Now, how did we get to work on exchange? That was really Suzumu again. That's what he wanted to do. He was not in engineering. He was in biological chemistry when he became my student. And we were doing high-resolution NMR, looking at proteins, especially amide protons. So, and you don't need to know the sequence, but what they do is they look at protons and N15. And here you see all the N15 bound protons, and they did that in a heteronuclear experiment, HSQC. And people had shown if you flip back the water, then you get more signal, which makes sense because the water suppression removes the exchangeable protons. And Suzumu came up with that you didn't need an extra pulse, just one little change. So one change in the phase of a pulse, and it worked perfectly. We got a lot of signal, huge amount of exchangeable proton signal. And that became a well-cited paper in high-resolution NMR. We wrote it in 2 hours, and the experiments took another hour or so that was very efficient. Okay, and what he also showed is, look, here, with the normal HSQC, you lost all this signal, you had to do long TR, but with the fast HSQC, you could basically do half a second to a second TR, so you could enhance by a factor of 5. And that is basically the inverse of the CEST effect. But of course, we didn't realize that at the time. And what Suzumu also did was experiments where we labeled the water, we inverted the water, and then looked, you could see the exchangeable protons come up, here the amide protons, and then the relate NOEs to the aliphatic protons. So, but we didn't think about CEST until I went to NIH. We had a 10-year anniversary of the NMR Center. And I was there, and Bob Balaban had a poster, and that basically was something like CEST on there. I later asked him, like I saw him a few years ago, I said, what was on that poster? He said, I don't remember. I said, I don't remember. All we remembered is there was a reception during the poster. So, but anyway, so I thought I have to do this stuff. So already in 98, 99, here's my summary notebook. We tried glycogen, and we got a big effect. Here the axis should be inverted. So we knew we could measure that, but in 99 we were setting up the center, doing the fiber tracking, all the other stuff, so it got a little bit lost. So 10 years later, or so 9 years later, I was talking to Dean Sherry, and I said, yeah, a long time ago we did those glycogen experiments. He said, you have to publish it, otherwise we do it. So then together with Dean and Craig, we wrote a paper on the glycosest, and we did some extra experiments. But of course, Bob deserves the credit. He did the first experiments. And in 2000, he published 3 papers, and which reminded me, I said, oh yeah, we have those data. What are we going to do now? So, and I was talking to Jeff Down and Jeff Bult. I said, how can we quickly write a paper? And Jeff said, why don't you do these gene delivery systems? They have amide protons. And we wrote a paper, and I wrote a theory in the paper. But then that's not really what I wanted to do, because remember, Suzumu had shown, like in cancer cells, that there were these high amide proton peaks, and also that in ischemia, these signals were changing. So I wanted to move it in vivo, and I needed somebody to do that. So I had not so many people in those days, but there was a new postdoc, Qinyan Zhao, and he had been doing theory for arterial spin labeling, 2-compartment transfer, and he didn't feel like really switching to CEST. But then something lucky happened again. I got a call from this guy. You might know him. You know, a few years ago, Michael Schumacher, the race car driver, he had a ski accident and was in bad shape. And this guy, Jean-François Payen de la Granderie, a noble family, I think, he was the chief anesthesiologist of the team helping Mike Schumacher survive. But in 2000, he had called me and said he wanted to do a sabbatical in my lab. So I went to Qinyan. I said, well, this guy is coming, and I want him to work on ischemia, so you have to help him. So this is how Qinyan got involved, and that was good because Qinyan really developed that technology. So we showed we could see ischemia with the amide protons, and we showed the signal was increased in cancer. So these were 2 papers in the early 2000s. And, you know, probably some people know. So now it's actually a product on some scanners, FDA approved. And you can see this amide proton transfer weighted imaging. This is, for instance, a high-grade tumor that does not enhance with gadolinium, but you can always see it on this imaging. And you can also separate progression from pseudoprogression and even judge IDH status in low-grade gliomas. And you can do stroke imaging. So Qinyan and his group, many Chinese, who are in our center, they have developed this technology. And, just a little commercial for CEST. So CEST is really growing fast. So in 2010, Silvio Amy organized the first workshop. There were probably 40, 50 people. And last year we had the 8th CEST workshop, and there were 200 people, and the field is really taking off. And it makes sense, because if you think about it, contrast agents, you have gadolinium, but it stays around and might be dangerous. But with CEST, every possible compound that has exchangeable protons is a contrast agent. So we can, there's many developments going on. Now I have a few minutes left, so since I'm old and I'm standing here, I want to talk about a few things I've learned during my career. When you're a postdoc or a student, you think, what's going to happen? Will I ever have a successful career? And I think most of the things that happened to me were basically pretty lucky. So, and you have to change sometimes. So what I've noticed during my life, every time I didn't want to change, but I was forced to change, good things happened because probably you were not doing the right thing anyway. That's why it wasn't going too well. So I also learned journal impact factor is not so important. So how many times have people, probably here too, tried to get a paper in Nature or Science? But I think it's more important to make your own impact. When you look at the diffusion literature, the Basher papers, thousands of citations, fiber tracking, thousands of citations, but Nature and Science didn't want to accept them. And Jim Picard gave me this interesting website where it said the impact factor of the journal is also linear with the retraction index of the journal. So don't, when you don't get your paper accepted, don't worry about it. It's more important people read your work. And then I also learned, Elias Serhouni was our chairman, and I really learned a lot from him, and he was an efficient guy. And one talk he said, working on something less important takes more time than working on something important. And I thought, that's a good point. That's very important. But remember, when sometimes you have a mediocre paper, you're working on it, you put it in, the reviewers don't like it, they say, what is it good for? And, so while a good new paper, it might go much quicker. So keep that in mind. So how about science careers? Well, I think, we're scientists, so my attitude is love it, or you change it, or you leave it, because we have to work hard, but you have to have fun. So I think I've had fun most of my career. So you need to be motivated, pursue your own ideas. I always tell my students and postdocs, if I say that something will not work, then you should especially try it, because I could be wrong. So little self-initiative is good. Read about topics not familiar to you. And I also think it's important to have others check your work, we don't know much. The older you get, the more you know that you don't know anything. So be self-critical and have others check your work. So I think there's this new website where you can pre-publish your work, but I'm an old-fashioned peer review guy. It's better to have it checked by some expert. And most important, I think, is to find a stimulating environment. And that's what I want to dedicate my last 2 slides to. Because at Hopkins, we're very lucky. We have different centers, but we're all united within the MRI division and headed by Paul Bottomley. And Paul has his annual retreat, and Paul is really a straightforward guy, He talks to everybody, he's a pioneer in MR. And at the beginning of the retreat, he gives his theory of science. It's called the hairball of science. So in our job as methods people is to grow new hairs. So you have to grow spectroscopy, diffusion, whatever. So we thought, well, okay. So after a few years, we started the Golden Hairball Award. So for the most promising science, because of Paul's theory. And what do we learn at the retreats? Well, everybody's hanging out, the students, the postdocs, the faculty. And it's a tough environment. So Paul, pretty intimidating guy. So you come to the retreat, you're a student, you give your 10-minute talk, and Paul says, well, why do we care? Is this important? But people learn from that. They're now prepared for that. And Paul wants us to ask the same things back. Like when he's showing phosphorus spectroscopy, I'll say, when will it be in the clinic, Paul? But Paul said, soon it will be in the clinic. But anyway, thanks to Paul, we have now this hugely dynamic environment. We're asking each other critical questions, and I think it's the greatest thing at Johns Hopkins that we have that. So this is my last slide. Well, funny thing is, I started with susceptibility tensors in the 80s, and the little circle seems complete because now we're doing susceptibility imaging and trying to look at susceptibility tensors. So is this the end of life? You never know. It becomes harder to grow new hairs when you're older, especially for guys. But I hope, that the few hairs my colleagues and I have been able to grow over the years are useful, and that we can do some more things in the future. So again, thank you very much, and I hope you will have a nice evening at the reception.
Okay. So, Peter, please come up. A little token.
Oh, okay, that's
It
nice.
is a plaquette that you have taken, that you have done the Lauterbur lecture of this year.
Okay, well.
And we're going to have a photo of us too.
Oh, a picture.
Yeah, yes. So my friends, we're going to have a little more music and 2 words from me before we finish. So again, I would like to welcome Jättekvartetten Finn. Now, before these gentlemen start, you might wonder who they are, right? Well, I brought them with me because they're all necessary. The first one here is Morten. I set my eyes on him when I was 15. He didn't notice, but we became friends for a lifetime, so that is now 45 years or so. And he's a dear colleague and a dear friend and a gentleman. Next to him is my clinical boss, my chief, at least he thinks, Lars. Behind him we have Anders. He and I did a medical theater back in the 1980s. Next to him is Christian, and if you wonder why everything I say, everything I do always looks perfect, it's because he makes, small adjustments, being an advertiser, a marketing person, so everything comes out good. And finally, I have a voice because of Roland, who is a professor in phonetics and laryngology, and he makes sure that my voice is okay despite my heavy smoking and a favor of a glass of red wine now and then. So, please,
Thank you very much. This last song is about a movie star hero who is an expert in almost anything. He can blow up enemy plants, he can mix his vodka with martini, but he's also very good at MRI. I don't know if you know that, but he is. In one of his movies, he actually manages to disarm an enemy by turning on and then off the magnetic field of a superconducting magnet within seconds. Try that. Try that.
When you were young and your heart was an open book, you used to say, live and let live. You know you did, you know you did, you know you did. But if this ever-changing world in which we live in makes you give in and cry, do-do-do, say live and let die. Live and let die. Live and let die. Live and let die.
James Bond. Zoom.
Thank you so much. Sorry. So, we are going to finish, and I all want you now to join me for this week. I would like to take the opportunity to thank you, the ISMRM members, for allowing me to be your ISMRM president for this year. It has been a fantastic journey. I have a few more days before I give the shovel over to the incoming president, Larry Wald. And I plan to have fun, network, see some science if I have time between all the meetings that I have. But I would like now also you to take the opportunity to visit this ISMRM meeting, all the different kind of possibilities that you have, the presidential lecture, the ED forum, go to the secret sessions, engage in the juniors by going to the Junior Fellow Symposium, and so on and so forth. And with this, I think it's time for us to say thank you very much for your attention and welcome you all to the reception in the exhibition hall. And thank you and enjoy the week. Thank you.